A lot of times when I see a movie, there will be someone listed in the credits as being a dialect coach. For the most part, in a movie, you don't actually need to coach a dialect. What you need is to coach an accent. So why did they call it this? A dialect coach. Well, first of all, a dialect is more in depth, all right, and is unnecessary to something that you actually have the words for. I'll explain that in just a bit. I think the real reason they don't say it is because accent coach isn't very impressive sounding as a title. It would be kind of like, okay, this is an exaggeration, but if you hire a surgeon for your school nurse, you wouldn't call them the school surgeon. That would be terrifying and overkill and not really useful. Accent coach is more accurate. So what is the difference? An accent is how the words are produced. That's how you actually make the sounds. There's actually more to it than that. But it all boils down to how the sounds are produced to make various words. Now the actual changes in words are different grammar or the different availability of words, different actual vocabulary. That is dialect. And a more, I guess, technically accurate, but perhaps a more extreme description of it would be, it's essentially a sub-language. If you listen to someone speaking Scots English, it is an actual dialect. There are both grammatical and lexical changes. In a lesser sense, dialect is the changes you make going from one place to the other. The idioms, the accent itself, of course, the words that you tend to use, these are arguably dialect. So there are two different ways that this sort of topic is going to be usable on this particular channel. One I would list as a villainous skill. That would be the dialect, because it allows you to come up with words and sentences that you need to do on the fly. In other words, basic conversation. I call it a villainous thing because it opens up the opportunities for you to do as you like. And that basically sums up villainy in most people's minds. There's actually a better word. We'll discuss that another time. I would also put this under performance skill. Now that is the accent part of this. When you're acting, the words are taken care of for you very kindly and hopefully very skillfully by the scriptwriter. You have the words already, and you don't need to figure out what order to put them in or what terminology or anything like that. You have your words. It's called your script. It's also a slight difference from a real-world sort of example, the more villainous skills, in which you need to be perfectly accurate with it. When you're on stage, you need to be understandable to your audience. And if I did, for example, if I was playing someone from Trinidad, and I used a straight-up Trinidadian accent and mode of speech, hardly anybody would understand me unless they were already familiar with it. Likewise, if I use actually almost any place that has any sort of real richness to the accent, it's very difficult for people to understand for the first at least few minutes, and sometimes for longer than that. So you need to make sure that you're understandable. You need to sound like someone from there, but without having an impenetrable accent. The topic today is, what is the easy way to get started with any accent? And most people listen to and mimic and try to match as well as they can from some amount of examples of it, whether it be from a movie or interview or something like that. And that is useful but it is not necessarily the best start. The easiest way is to learn some of the target language first. If I want to learn how someone has a Russian accent sounds, the easiest way for me to do it is to learn some Russian. I will understand more intuitively at that point the way in which the words are made, the way it's said, because accents are a set of habits. If I learn French, if I don't do it carefully, I'm going to speak with an American accent, and that means that I'm going to use my natural way of making the sounds, and it's not going to come across like a French person would. Conversely, if I want to sound like a French person speaking English, who has not had accent training, it would do well for me to learn the way in which a French person makes their vowels and their consonants, because even a basic consonant like T, will sound quite different based on someone from Nebraska, or someone from Northern England, or someone from Italy. Are going to be quite different. And that makes a difference to whether your accent sounds realistic or not. Of course, things like, if I want to have a Yorkshire accent, learning English first isn't going to help me very much, because I kind of speak English already. Living in the area would be very helpful, because that will get you in the habit of it simply by rubbing off on you. Again, this is the easiest way, but it is not the fastest way. The fastest way is whenever we have a show to learn, and we need to adopt an accent fairly quickly, whether or not we've ever done it before. So, I suggest this five-point way of learning an accent, and it will get it to you very quickly. The first thing you should do is find out where to place the accent in your mouth. And one of the first things you're going to want to do is get a hold of some sort of resource about the accent that will help you place it. Some of them will actually say, place the accent here. It may sound in front of you. It may sound in the back of your mouth. It may sound in your teeth. It's a thing where if you imagine the focal point of your sounds to be there, then you will already be a long ways on the way to having that accent. A standard California accent is fairly back, about in the middle of the mouth, around here. If I do a surfer dude accent, it's going to roll forward a fair bit. And in fact, if you watch somebody mimic a surfer dude accent, you will see them shift it. You'll see the shift in the way they hold their mouth. An Australian accent tends to be farther back, not as far as Russian, but farther back than Californian. An Austrian accent tends to be right out here. If you took a marble and held it just behind your teeth, that's basically where it is. I find the northern German accents tend to focus in front of your mouth. The character that I've been playing in the melodrama that I am almost done with now, it has an accent based on the American Southeast, and it's actually fairly directly taken from the character of the Baron in Into the Badlands. The Baron, for me, was actually very handy for this kind of thing. I had listened to hours of his speech. Now, the man who plays him also played Lord Celeborn in the Lord of the Rings movies. He is, in fact, from New Zealand. His father was Hungarian, I believe. And it is absolutely not his natural accent, but he did a splendid job in doing so. It was very easy for me to adopt that sort of accent for the thing just by finding the place for the thing. But second point, you're going to want to involve these sound changes. Now, this is what most people think of when they're thinking of accents. The changes of the sounds, the dropped H's or or T's, or the additions of R's or removal of R's, as the case may be, and the changes of vowel tending to be a different thing from one region to the next. This is the sort of thing that you normally think of. You'll find it much easier, much faster to work with if you place the thing first. It will naturally lend itself to these other changes. And this is actually, if you do a few of those changes and along with the placement of the focal point, you'll be farther along than most people ever will in getting the new accent. Now, there's more to it than that. Thirdly, I would suggest adjusting where the word stress differences are. And these are wildly different. Someone who has a Finnish accent will tend to hit every other word with the stress, bunka, 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 bunka. Someone who does French will tend to have almost no stresses at all. Japanese, similarly. And each area has its own sort of differences. There are general applications and there are certain word-specific ones. Americans, Australians, and Englishmen are always amused by the way each other changes the emphasis of words from one to another. Fourth, and this is something that people are also fairly well aware of, but rarely do very well, is what we call the music of the accent. And probably the most famous one would be like Swedish or Irish, and those are quite animated, and as a result people tend to be aware of them. They also tend to do them wrong. Saoirse Ronan, who starred in Brooklyn, had a great interview with one of the late night hosts, I don't remember which right now, in which she explained and demonstrated to him how to do an Irish accent. She went over the fact that Americans tend to bump up their tone far too much to do Irish accent. That's not exactly how it works. I recommend having a look at that if you're interested in it. It's a very good example of right and wrong ways to do that music. Now, every area has its sort of music, and there are variations, of course, from one person to the next, and this is true of all of these factors. But for the most part, if you get a generalized thing, you'll have it. Now, the fifth part, by the way, that the music is one of the most important. The change sounds and the music are the ones that you want to mostly be able to listen to somebody regarding. And having hopefully a few hours of stuff to listen to would be really good in that regard. The fifth part is that you need to assemble all this into a mode of thought. Remember, accents and dialects are habits. They're sets of habits. And if you put them together into something that is something you can just click into, it's very easy. I find myself sometimes wandering into the sort of Louisianan sound that I have in one accent, and sometimes the Queens sound that I had. I'm sorry, not Queens, the Brooklyn sound. What am I thinking? From the previous role, because they're characters that I can just slip into. In fact, using a character is actually a very useful way of doing it. There is a blogger who you can see her shift into I'll link her in the notes here. You can see her shift into various characters as she shifts accents, and that is so that she can simply become that set of ways of doing things. It's a very useful mnemonic. You can see Val Kilmer's character in the movie The Saint doing this regularly. He in fact has a variety of characters, and each one is named for a saint. And this is the sort of thing where you can expand it from just the accent to a whole character. The character can actually involve the dialect, the accent, habits, everything. This is a much more in-depth option, but it's a good example of the sort of thing that will get you to that accent more quickly. So, place the accent, make the sound changes, adjust the word stress to be appropriate, apply the music of the thing, and this all sort of reinforces each other in a circle, and then put them all together into a mode of thought, character, something in which you can trigger the habits. And there you have it. Accents.